It's all about the offensive line here on Farmageddon Friday.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, hit me with that beat. It's a Locked On College Crossover here at Farmageddon Friday, Locked On Kansas State, and Locked On Cyclones. Christian Rauh here with Nick Marovets, and we're bringing you what we do every Friday, talking the Wildcats, talking the Cyclones, and talking 1 week closer to week 0, Dublin, Ireland. It's going to be an absolute blast to kick off the college football season. And this week we're talking offensive line, the final category, if you will, the positional group of the offense before we swing over to July and swing over to the defense. We're going to have that covered you on this show today. We're going to talk offensive line for the Cyclones, the Wildcats, and then we got a fun segment for you at the end here, kind of rounding up all the comments we found from the offensive episodes of Farmageddon Friday of the last few weeks that you chimed in, and we're going to talk about them and give you your thoughts right here on this show. Before we do that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. You won Farmageddon last year. That's the only time I'm going to bring it up in this episode, but the reason I brought it up is because you get to go first. If you haven't listened to any of these episodes, that's how this rolls. And we're talking offensive line, Nick, and the offensive line has always been a strong point for Kansas State. I mean, when you think of corn-fed kind of middle flyover kind of states, you think of a strong offensive line. You wonder what's in the food, what's in the milk, and Iowa State is no different. What does this offensive line look like to you heading into this year where you just missed winning the Big 12 championship? Now you got to find a way to actually maybe potentially win that. It all starts in Dublin.
No, 100%. The offensive line is one of the strong points, I feel like, of any Iowa team, not just Iowa State University, not just University of Iowa, but the UNI, obviously, and then any Iowa Western, any of those Eastern Iowa type schools, not just specifically in the East, but you get what I'm saying. Corn-fed, cornbread Iowans are... It's the name of the game. That's what we're kind of known for. Now, obviously, every single offensive lineman is from Iowa, but it is a point of emphasis, I feel like, from Iowa State. And so I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more in the coming moments. What is important to this offensive line? Is it run game? Is it pass game? But as a whole, I think that the offensive line is a major point of contention for this team, something that they can do very well. I think in comparison to the defensive line, the offensive line was significantly better last season. I thought they did really, really well, not only in the pass, but also in the run game, opening things up, because all plays we know start from the offensive line. Games are won and lost in the trenches across the board, but the offensive line plays a major role in how many points you can accumulate over the course of a game. I think if I'm looking at where this line is at right now, I like where it's at. There were some additions, there were some losses, and I could dive into those here in a moment. But really, I don't feel bad about this at all. You know, I really do feel pretty solid about where Iowa State's at this moment in time.
That's good. That's good to hear. And that's where it starts. And we're talking about obviously week 0, and I want to obviously beat Iowa State by 50, but moving forward for the rest of the season, you want to see these teams, improve and look good. And I know that this is not the same as basketball where you're rooting for your conference mate to do well when you're not playing them. But at the same time, I'm a Big 12 believer, and I want to make sure that you see, these teams succeed. Looking at your offensive line, before I get into some of the questions that I have about it, I got to know, who do you think is going to be like anchoring this offensive line? Who are your returners? Who are some of your guys that are coming in from the portal? And maybe somebody who could shock to be one of the top players on your offense this season?
Well, looking at the offensive line prior to Farmageddon Fridays, if you will, when I was previewing the entire offense, I personally thought that the offensive line was, and I'm going to say this and you have to give me a second, the weakest point in Iowa State's offense. And I know that sounds bad. I understand that. But don't look at it as Iowa State's offensive line is weak so much as everything else on Iowa State's offense is very, very strong. So somebody inevitably has to be the weakest, right? That only makes sense. Unless everyone was entirely equal across the board, it has to be that somebody is just marginally less than the rest. That's where I put Iowa State's offensive line. Matt Campbell did not say the same thing. Matt Campbell thought that this was one of the deepest rooms in our program right now. He thought they had a good spring. He thought that they were really, really solid based on, it was the last press conference after spring ball. I thought there were a lot of guys coming in, bringing talent, ability. And to answer your question of who's coming into town, the loss of the Helton twins was unexpected to me. I thought that those were going to be guys that we could potentially rely on, those rocks, if you will, in this offensive line. But they're out of town. We got to move on from them. They're on to ASU now, I believe. Derek Jensen and Austin Barrett are coming into town from Wisconsin and IU, respectively. Those are two guys that I think might not necessarily contribute a whole lot this season. We'll have to see, obviously, how things play out. But I do think they add depth and competition to this group to elevate the play of the unit as a whole, which is extremely exciting. Now you ask what guy kind of stands out as a whole. During spring training, Ryan Clanton, the offensive line coach, notably wearing a Rocco Becht hat, which is, I think, extremely important for an offensive line coach. What's the goal of the offensive line? Protect the quarterback is kind of number one, right? And then block for the running back is arguably number two there. Wearing the Rocco Becht basically said that Brendan Black is kind of that guy. Now, I will say Ryan Clanton had a lot of names that he rattled off and just literally used the term dog and immediately got my attention, used terms like freight train and dog. And I was like, okay, this team literally might not lose a single game. But Trevor Burr, Dylan Barrett, both thrown in there. Brendan Black has come again and again as a guy that could really light up this offensive line and be kind of that dude for Iowa State. I believe he'll be shifting to center this season. We'll have to see exactly how that plays out. Obviously, there's going to be movement. There's going to be finding out who's better, where, when, and in what situations. But I do think if I had to circle one guy, it would be Brendan Black. That does not take anything away from the entire offensive line. This unit will be very, very good this season, especially in comparison to last year.
Well, injuries happen, and obviously that's just part of the game, and that's not what I'm trying to get at here. But what I'm trying to get at is you need more than 5, and you listed more than 5 names here. I don't think you need actually 10. You don't need 2 full units for depth, but do you think there's enough players on this squad right now that if something happens, they can plug in and play and not worry about maybe falling behind and still being a Big 12 contender with the offensive line they have in front of them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We saw guys playing all over the board last season. I believe, if I'm correct, we even saw tight ends playing some offensive line last season. That's based on my own observation, but I do believe that that's the case. And so that's the versatility of Iowa State in a nutshell right there for you. I think the depth is 100% there. The question is, can this offensive line execute to the level that they are required to? And what is required for this team? You got to eliminate mental errors. You got to eliminate playing outside the rules. You got to eliminate basically penalties, if you will, which is essentially errors, but blocking assignments are different than penalties. And then the other thing that Ryan Clanton had mentioned is playing it to the edge physically, bringing everything you have to the table at all times. So when you ask about depth, I am not so concerned, as far as injuries go. That's not really where my attention lies. It lies more in the fact that this team is deep enough to play 110% on every single snap. And they talked about during spring practice that this unit was just blowing it out of the water as far as aggression, taking it to the max in every single possibility that they could, really, really kind of showing what this team is going to be about as a whole, but specifically on the offensive line. And that deep unit, if you will, the turnover allows guys to stay fresh. You don't see that as much on the offensive line, and I completely understand that, but it at least opens the door for something like that to happen, where if the right tackle's banged up, maybe a little bit low on breath, long drive, it doesn't hurt Iowa State to sub in a guy. I think that is super that's like a superpower, if you will. Now, is that something we'll see? I don't know. I honestly don't think that that's necessarily super common, but is that what sets Iowa State apart? Question mark? Maybe.
I think depth in the trenches is what changes you from being a 7-win team to potentially a 10-win team, if I'm being completely honest, when it comes to both of these squads. My final question before I hand you the keys here, I know we're running a little long on this one, but I got to ask this question. Putting all the offensive segments we've had over the last couple of weeks together, Rocco Beck, obviously, the biggest storyline for me is he's lost his two main wide receivers. I think that's probably the biggest storyline that you hear from outside of Iowa State, looking in at Iowa State. He might need more time to get some trust with his wide receivers, to make reads. We don't know if that running back room is going to be as trustworthy as it can, right? There's a lot of moving parts with this new offense of Iowa State, at least in my opinion, from the outside looking in. Can the offensive line give Rocco that time? And if so, what has to change to make sure that Iowa State is successful with this offensive line in 2025?
I'm glad you asked, and I will keep it quick because you're right. We're running a little bit long here. I think it's pretty well known that the offensive line is integral to how an offense performs. They need to give the quarterback time to throw, and they need to open up running lanes for the running backs. I think we saw this last year. Obviously, two 1,100-yard wide receivers, pretty notable. I don't think a ton needs to necessarily change. I think that there will be adjustments, and we're going to see some guys that have been in the system for a while that understand it a little bit better. They learned a little bit more from last year. They got more reps. I'm not too worried about this offensive line. I think it's just important to note that a lot of Iowa State's success will hinge on the offensive line. Everyone wants to look to the big names like Rocco and Xavier Townsend and Chase Sowell and Carson Hansen, right? And throw in Bramer, like all of these big names that everybody knows. And, oh, he dropped a pass. Oh, we could have scored there. Well, how'd the offensive line play throughout the game? And I have a full glass of trust in this offensive line to get it done. I am not seeing anything that's pointing towards this being a major weak point, though I personally did rank it lowest. That doesn't mean it's a weak point. I think this team is going to be very, very good in the trenches.
Full glass of trust. Let's see if that travels across the seas to Ireland. It's up to you now. I'm going to give you the keys. We'll do that next and talk Kansas State right here on Farmageddon Friday between Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Cyclones. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day. You suddenly realize you want to be in those stands. It's a beautiful day. You want a hot dog and maybe a nice frosty beverage. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress, so you can enjoy that hot dog and that nice cool beverage. I'm sure you would like one of those right now, Nick. I'm sure I would too, with the weekend coming up. Perfect time. It's hot everywhere across the United States, and what a better way to take in with a game with Game Time. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, even invite a bigger group of friends to come with you. Game Time makes it that possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. The prices on the app actually drop closer when you get the first pitch, which is amazing because you get that much more excited and you get that much more in your pocket. And they've got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. The seat views, have you seen this on the app? The seat views right in the app before you buy, you know exactly where you're going to sit. So that's perfect. Going back, you can maybe steer that camera to find where the nearest beer vendor is. That's where I'd be going, right? Maybe not the first baseline, but make what's going on that. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets and for where you're sitting closest to that nearing frosty beverage vendor with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account with code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, Nick.
Guaranteed. So we all know that games are won and lost in the trenches. And I think we can all agree, literally every single person, not only in this call, but also watching and listening, that Iowa State is far, far superior to Kansas State. I'm pretty sure we're all on the same page there. Though, Christian, you did mention something that caught my attention. Kansas State's offensive line being something of a point of emphasis, right? Something that Kansas State is very good at in recent years. I'm curious, is this year going to live up to past years? Because Kansas State, being known for that kind of cornbread, tough guy, offensive line type of team, does it play up to standards?
Well, I'll agree with you. I think over the last couple of years, It's been amazing. And it's been one of the best position groups on the team. When you look at the offensive line, even in years when fans think the offensive line isn't doing up what they need to and living up to standards, it still finds a way to win like national awards. So do I think they can do it this year, though? That's the big question, because there is a lot of
Mm.
moving parts and a lot of changing parts. Now, that's a kind of a two-sided question. I'm optimistic about this position group, but I think I probably have the most questions I've had in quite some time with this group.
Mhm.
And it's not that maybe it should be a bad thing. Maybe like what you said with Iowa State, where you think it's the weakest position group on the entire squad, but you're not saying it's a bad group. That's what I think as well with the offensive line. I don't know if it's the weakest group per se, but I think there's just so many question marks that it either could be the weakest group when it's all said and done, which still might find a way to win a national award, right? Or it could be one of the best offensive lines in the dang country that's fighting for a position in the college football playoffs, not even just the Big 12 championship when it's all said and done. They moved on from a couple players, some that were starting last year, had the transfer portal. They also moved on from their offensive line coach, who was the co-offensive coordinator as well, and Connor Riley. He's now the offensive line coach for the Dallas Cowboys. So that just tells you that he made basically a lateral change from offensive line coach at Kansas State to offensive line at the Dallas Cowboys. So he had NFL type coaching at Kansas State. Now you have a brand new coach in here with Brian LePeck, and I think he's great. So far, what he's done on the recruiting trail has been absolutely amazing. The momentum is insane, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about what are they going to look like in 2025, and I think that all goes to what they brought in the transfer portal. They do have a couple units, a couple players that are returning as well. What I brought to you in the last segment when I asked you about do they have enough depth, I think that is something that Kansas State actually is going to be a strength in. It's just right now in this moment, and I think fall camp will figure this all out, which we'll have more of a conversation in the future. Who's actually going to be those 5 players that are the starting Kansas State linemen? Because I think there are multiple players that could take that spot. And I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing yet. Competition's a fantastic thing, don't get me wrong, but you almost kind of want a surefire thing on the offensive line, knowing that you got those guys ready to roll. And right now, I don't know if we have that with every single position group. There's a few players on this squad that get me really excited in this position group, but there also are a couple where I'm like, well, maybe he's the number 1 guy, or maybe he's the second unit guy. And I don't know if I should feel good or if I should feel worried about that right now.
Okay, so I I don't want to dive too far into this to take away from our third segment, because I am very interested to see what the folks are saying about Farmageddon Fridays. But I do have a few questions here.
Bring
The
it.
first, I'm just going to ask it here. It's not a great segue, but it is a question that I have, and I believe a lot of Iowa State fans will have as well. When we talked about what Kansas State was going to attack Iowa State with in Dublin, right? We talked about the rain potentially being an issue. We're going to predominantly be a run or a pass style offense. What do you think that this offensive line is better at? Are they better in the run, or are they better in the pass? Because will this play into Farmageddon is ultimately what I think it comes down to for fans of at least Iowa State. Obviously, Kansas State fans want to know for the course of the season. I know Cyclone fans really mostly care about this game unless there is a Big 12 championship kind of rematch.
Yeah, for sure. If I had to put a guess at it right now, just not knowing who the 5 are going to be, I could give you a guess who I think they're going to be, and I might be 100% correct because there are some people leading the charge. I'd probably say they're a run-heavy team, and I think that's a good thing. I think if you are going to
Yeah.
be a top college program in college football right now, trying to make to the Big 12 championship and arguably the toughest conference in college football, parity from top to bottom, and then trying to find
100%.
your 1 or 2 bids, should be 2, for the Big 12 and the college football playoffs this season, I think you got to control the run game, especially with the speed you have from a guy like Dylan Edwards and the play action that you're going to utilize from Matt Wells. You have to make sure you're successful in the run game for everything else to work. My most exciting thing is that this offensive line right now, how it looks, you can have transfers on the corners with like a guy like maybe George Fitzpatrick, who's coming over from Ohio State, a player who just won a national championship with Ohio State. And then you also have guys like Taylor Potier, who has been here since Chris Kleiman has. He's entering his 7th season at Kansas State. Obviously, some medical issues, but he's been with this program as long as Chris Kleiman's been. And then you're also bringing in honorable mentions all Big Ten honorable mentions, and JB Nelson, who was a force on the offensive line at Penn State. And Penn State is arguably probably the best offensive line in the country. I think you can make an argument for that. I don't want to, but here I am right there. So when you have that type of unit, it's the biggest question is, can they gel? Can they get it all together? Because we're talking about a game that's coming up before any other game in the regular season, Nick. We're talking about week 0. And I think this goes for both you and I, both our teams here. When it comes to depth, when it comes to preparedness, when it comes to strength, conditioning, whatever you need it to be, it's all happening a week earlier. And we saw it with the spring training window. We saw it with the strength and conditioning window. They had to speed that up and change it to make sure that they were prepared. I'm sure they're also going to do the same thing with the fall window as well. Fall camp's going to be really interesting. And I think what you're really going to have to pay attention to with these offensive linemen is who sticks out and who can stay healthy. Because if you have 7 or 8 guys ready to roll for Iowa State, I think you're in a really, really good spot the way that these guys came in for transfer portals. I know we didn't dig into them too much, but that's exactly what I feel about this offensive line. Now that I've talked about it, I don't feel as concerned. I'm a little bit more optimistic, but I just can't give you the answer of who will be the number 1 through 5, left tackle through right tackle. I can't give you that yet because I do think there's going to be some good competition in fall camp. So there you go. Another episode for my friends over at Locked On Kansas State.
Yeah, no, I agree. Really quick question for you. I know I kind of put you in a catch-22 here, and I want to get to these comments, so we will. Do you think that bringing over Big Ten level O-line play, championship level O-line play, is going to be a big deal for Kansas State? I understand that this is. Are you going to say the Big Ten is maybe better than Kansas State? I know that this is a weird spot to be in, but I mean, coming from Ohio State, from Penn State, is a big deal.
Two things can be true with that kind of conversation right there. The Big 12 as a whole is better than any other conference, as I mentioned, from top to bottom.
Agreed.
Parity from first to last. There is no better. But we're also talking about players from the national championship winning team, Ohio State, and from Penn State, who was also in the college football playoffs. So I think two things can be true. I think you're bringing in great players from great programs, but that conference as a whole is not as good as the Big 12. I'm sorry. If you don't like that, debate a door.
No, agreed. Excuse my voice crack there, as I just thought about how the NFL has kind of transitioned toward a more run-heavy offense. So that's something that maybe Kansas State will try to model there. Let's loosen up the sport jackets a little bit, maybe gives the tie some breathing room as we talk next about some comments about the offensive side of Farmageddon Fridays.
I am so excited for this. This is going to be so much fun. This is something that I have been thinking about. I put these all in the little banners. I got it ready to go. I didn't tell you about this until about 2 minutes before we hit live. So you are not ready. Yeah, you're not. You have no idea what I put on here. I just told you that we got some comments for some of the fans, and these came from all of the offensive episodes we've had so far on Farmageddon Friday. So over like the past 4 weeks, basically the month of June. And we've had a few episodes and a few comments, and really appreciate that. And if you want to have your comments
shout out
brought on here, we're going to do this again, probably do at the end of the defensive episodes. We might even make this a weekly thing if it becomes really exciting. We get some really good comments, right? So brought it in there. So first, let's dig into it. And I went through the Locked On Cyclones YouTube page. It went over on Locked On Kansas State. I found some good comments we're going to talk about on here. And I think we're going to start off with this one. This came from a Locked On Cyclones listener. His name is SVD Sinner.
Shout out.
He talked about, this is what the biggest narrative, right? He talked about the wide receiver issue of losing Noel and Higgins. But this was also on the episode about the tight ends. He said losing Noel and Higgins means that everybody else is gunning for Rocco's heart to be his preferred target. This is going to give a tight end the chance to explode out the gate. Nick, what's your thoughts on that? And if there is one tight end that's going to explode out the gate, who is it going to be?
I think the biggest thing to remember here is that Xavier Townsend and Rocco Beck do have an existing relationship. So there's going to be an element of that. Now, granted, this is still college level ball. It's best man up kind of situation, but it's at least worth remembering that. As far as the tight ends go, I do think that Bramer and Burkle are going to be the two that are kind of the front runners at this point. We'll have to see exactly how it plays out with fall camp and summer workouts, and you build all this trust throughout the off season up until week 0, where Iowa State's going to be squaring off against Kansas State. I am going to stand by this, and it may burn me. Okay, you can let me know at Nick_Marv on Twitter if I'm wrong about this. You can tweet at Freezing Cold Takes. I think Alexander is going to be super good. I do. I think he is going to be a guy. I really do. And so we'll have to see how it plays out. I 100% don't know exactly which tight end is going to stand out. I think that there's the existing relationship with Burkle, Bramer obviously making that highlight. Alexander, I want to see. I don't know if at this point it's what I want, but don't ignore Townsend. I think that existing relationship it's gonna be a big deal.
I think it'd be a win if you got on Freezing Cold Takes. Like, wouldn't you be excited to get that though?
That'd be pretty sweet. I'm not gonna lie.
Hey, I don't know if you remember this, but during the wide receiver episode, talking about Higgins and Noel and things like that, and you were talking about some new transfers coming in, you made a comparison to Devontae Adams and the New York Jets.
Yes.
Do you remember that? Can you kind of refresh what you meant by that?
I believe, if I remember correctly, I was comparing Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers to Xavier Townsend and Rocco Beck, the existing relationship being something that's very important in football.
Okay, great. Because on Locked On Kansas State, Zed Dead
please.
said, I hope Iowa State finds the same success that the Jets did with Rodgers and Adams, meaning they did not do well. And
why don't we go with the Packers? Let's go with the Packers.
Well, recency bias is a real thing, so gotta love that. So this one definitely had to come into the conversation here. Really love that. So any rebuttal on that? Okay.
I'll ask you this. This is just a question that just came to mind. If you had to pick one of the two teams, actually, no, I know exactly. If I were to ask which team would be the Jets, I know you'd pick the Cyclones. Okay, that's just not a good question. If you had to equate the Cyclones and the Kansas State Wildcats to a team in the NFL, who would they be? Because I don't think Iowa State would be the Jets, though the New York Cyclones is a very real thing. New York Texans.
No, the Kansas Jayhawks be closer to the Jets. Yeah, the Kansas Jayhawks be closer to the Jets because they can't win a game or anything important. Oh, man. I mean, hey, the Iowa Cyclones just went to the Big 12 championship last year, so you could put them in a pretty high number. You know, these are two hard-nosed teams. So I don't know if I can give an actual team, but I'll give a division. I think both these teams would belong in the NFC North. Hard-nosed type football like the Bears, the Vikings, the Lions, Packers. I think that's where both these teams would live.
Definitely. Run it back. Let's keep these comments going. I'm enjoying this. This is fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're enjoying this because next one is a score prediction saying 31-21 Cats by Damon Newell. Okay. And then also
Damon Newell, I'm sorry. You're wrong.
Oh, well, if you think he's wrong, how about Robbie Schultz says Cats 45-21. Iowa State's not making it to the championship game, probably going 8-5. Now, I think the over-under from our friends at FanDuel win total is 7.5, so bet the over still. But 8-5, what do you think about that? That means 8-5. That means either a 7-5 regular season or an 8-4 with a bowl loss. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the 8 wins is about Iowa State's floor. So shout out Robbie for at least taking the floor. I mean, I get that as a rivalry, opponent. I understand that.
Fair.
I think you might have just been cherry picking every single score prediction that the Kansas State Wildcat fans made. So every Cyclone fan needs to comment down below what your score prediction is so we can right these wrongs.
Yeah, there was no score predictions from your Locked On Cyclones, so they were not helping you out at all in these. I got these.
They were thinking.
So I had to make sure
they were thinking it.
Yeah, okay. Internal comments. Those don't help the algorithm, folks. Make sure you get those in and help the channel grow. Okay. Hey, look, I, as a Kansas State fan, would love to see 45-21, but as a college football fan, I want that game a lot closer in Dublin. I want it to be down to the wire. So
last second field goal, Conrarty puts it through from 58 yards out. Longest field goal in Dublin. We're winning.
Interesting. I mean, that's a good hot take. All right, going to another.
It would be fun. It'd be fun.
It'd be fun. Going to a Cyclones comment here from Bob Taylor 1645. Given the strength, and there's a whole bunch of tight ends here. Tight end conversation makes sense. Both these tight end rooms. I know this is a really bad time to talk tight ends after losing Ian Premer, both of us this week. But given the strength of the ISU tight end room, I'd expect the attempts to the wide receivers to be down quite a bit, with a lot of the load on the tight ends, often with 2 or 3 tight end sets. This is something that I actually asked you, wondering about target share with Noel and Higgins. It was over 160 receptions last year. I do think the tight ends are going to get a lot more love, but I don't know if it's that much. But I like what he's saying here.
No, I don't think he's wrong. Shout out Bob Taylor, 1645 here. I think this is a very valid take. Obviously, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. So when I kind of give my predictions, I'm just kind of, I don't love to, but painting with a broad brush, exploring all possibilities. And I do think that the tight ends getting a lion's share of targets, that's a very real thing. I don't think that that's out of the realm of possibility. I think it maybe is even in Iowa State's best interest to kind of broaden the horizons and target multiple receivers or I guess receiving options if you include tight ends there. The question is, I'll bounce it back to you unless you have a good comment to because I want to fire through as many of these as we can. Is the same thing true of Kansas State?
I mean, Kansas State, I said there's a potential being 5 deep on this one, and with the fact of their tight end room.
Right.
And here's another comment from Trevor Theisen. I think that's how you say it. Not Theismann. We're not talking leg breaks here. Quarterbacks, 63-17. Don't forget the tight ends with the addition of Linkon Cure, 5-star, right? Got to make sure we put Linkon Cure in the conversation because he's the one that actually committed to Kansas State in the last year. Top player out of Kansas last year. Won the state in a 110 hurdles. This is something interesting, and this is something moving on to what we're going to talk moving next couple weeks, the defensive side. Thinks K-State will put a lot of pressure on those linebackers from Iowa State to cover them and the speed from the running backs, like Dylan Edwards, and obviously a dual threat of your Johnson, that play action and RPO. Matt Wells is going to be very effective with that play action. And I think the first team that's really going to get a taste of it, because Rutgers kind of got a small taste in the bowl game, is going to be Iowa State. So I do think when it's all said and done, I know this was an offensive line conversation in today's show, but when we're wrapping up and looking at these entire offenses for not just week 0, but for the entire season, these tight end rooms are going to be huge and major impacts for both of these programs.
Yes. I think that's what's clear. I'm not going to comment on the linebackers because I think this is the perfect transition into the defensive kind of segue, if you will, these next few shows we're going to do. So stick around if you want your comment featured on the show. You know exactly where to do it on Twitter at LockedOnKState or at Nick_Marv, any of the YouTube, whatever. We'll cover them. But I think that the tight end room is ridiculously important for both of these teams. Let's just leave it at that.
We got one more comment to finish up the show, but our next Farmageddon Friday is on the 4th of July. So you normally think that you'd go from
birthday, America.
Yeah, right. You think you normally go from offensive line to defensive line, but I'm thinking maybe since we're talking about the land of the free, maybe we talk about the free safeties and the secondary for 4th of July. What do you think about that?
Clean. I like
See
it.
I
like that a lot.
I'm using my head here. This is all brain. This is all brain conversation.
That's big brain type stuff right over there.
Big brain energy. I love that. Final comment here, and this is probably the best one. So shout out. Farmageddon Friday, best idea.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. It's been a blast and really enjoying this, getting all up into August 23rd. And we're gonna hit you every Friday until that right here on Locked On College Crossover, the Locked On Kansas State, Locked On Cyclones here at Farmageddon Friday. Please like the video, please subscribe. And this has been a Locked On College Crossover.
Yeah, I think he said go Cyclones, actually, was what that was.
Who said go Cyclones?